Justin Gaethje, give your BMF title to Volkanovski. Which champion accepts a fight with Islam Makhachev on 11 days notice? Guys, let's break down UFC 294. Hey guys, kicking off the first fight of UFC 294, we have Bruno Silva, who's 23-9, versus the crazy Sharabutdin Magomedov, who's 10-0. Let's talk about Bruno Silva though first. He has 4 wins and 3 losses in the UFC, and I think that the fight with Alex Pereira definitely took a pep out of his step. Having then the next fight of his, having lost to Gerald Misha by submission, he then picked up a win against Brad Tavares, but then lost against Brendan Allen by submission again. Then we have Sharabutdin. Man, Sharabutdin having crazy things happen outside the cage, sucker punching that guy that just kissed his girlfriend or whatever. He's crazy, his temper's wild, he's very aggressive. Now, he has great power. Being 10-0, the UFC is really trying to push him as like this, bad man of the UFC, or trying to, paint him in that light. I think that now that Bruno Silva isn't as tenacious and aggressive in his fight style, we'll see Sharabutdin win by first round knockout. And then guys, on to the next one. We have Viktoriia Dudakova versus JinhYu Frey. Let's talk about JinhYu Frey. So she has 2 wins and 3 losses in the UFC. She's 38 years old. Her most recent loss being Elise Reed, who's 7-4. Not a great record, and just in general, her record being 11-9, it's definitely not good. Her opponent though, Viktoriia Dudakova, is 7-0, coming off a win on the Dana White Contender Series, where she handed Maria Silva her first loss. Maria Silva is now 9-1. I feel that Viktoriia Dudakova is on a better trajectory. She has power. She has a really good sound fight IQ, and I think she actually wins this by decision. The next fight, guys, we have Nathaniel Wood versus Mohammad Naimov. First, let's talk about Mohammad Naimov. He's coming off a win from his UFC debut, and he KO'd Jamie Malaki. What I don't like about his record, though, is that on the regional scene, he's lost against fighters that have 5-0, which isn't good to see. He was on the Dana White Contender Series, and he did face Colin Algen. And in that fight, we saw him bite on a lot of the feints. What I did like, though, is that he incorporated the calf kick early in the fight. Moving on to Nathaniel Wood, he's 20-5 in his overall record. In the UFC, he has 7 wins and 2 losses. He was struggling a bit at bantamweight. In his first UFC loss, he got knocked out by John Dodson, and then he lost, I believe, by a decision against Casey Kenny. He's then taken 2021 off and has come back in 2022 and revamped his career at featherweight. I like his style because he adopts a boxing style, very crisp hands. His takedown defense, he's improving, and he does like to work in the clinch sometimes. So I believe with Nathaniel adopting a boxing style, he will have a lot of feints, which Muhammad will bite on. And then I believe that Nathaniel will be winning by decision. Okay, guys, so the next fight, we have Mike Breeden, who's 10-6, and Anshul, 7-0. Let's talk about Mike, though, who's on a 3-fight losing streak. He's lost by first round knockout by Terence McKinney and Alexander Hernandez, and has lost by decision by Nathan Levy. The issue with him is that he has a lot of first round knockouts and he's taken quite a lot of damage. And then we have Anshul Jubli, who's making UFC history as being the first Indian UFC fighter. So he's coming off a win against Sedriques, which was in the road to UFC. He did eat quite a few leg kicks, and that's because he does rely heavy on his jab and puts a lot of pressure on his lead leg. His opponent at the time, Sedriques, was 13-2. He did take his opponent down in the first round. He tired him out, and then we see Anshul win by round 2 TKO via ground and pound. Anshul being 7-0 is having more momentum and a better trajectory, and that's why I have him winning against Mike Brennan by knockout. Okay, guys, so the next fight. Abu Azaitar, who's 14-3-1, versus Sedriques Dumas, who's 8-1. Abu Azaitar is coming off a loss against Marc-Andre Barriault, and that was by 3rd round TKO. He hasn't fought since 2021 and is now making a comeback against Sedriques Dumas. What I don't like about Abu Azaitar is that before that fight in 2021, his last fight was in 2018, and before that was in 2016. Now, momentum is, as I repeated in the video, a big part of the fight game. If you're not fighting consistently or at least once a year, what are you really doing? And then we have Sedriques Dumas, who's sitting at 8-1. He made his UFC debut this year against Josh Fremd. In that fight, we did see that there was a weakness with his grappling and submission defense, ultimately securing Josh Fremd a round 2 submission win. But then 3 months later, he bounces back, showing improved takedown defense and winning a comfortable decision against Cody Brundage, who at the time was 8-4. What I see happening in this fight is because Azaitar isn't consistent with his fighting, I think that what we see is Sedriques open up with his hands, and I actually see Sedriques winning by knockout. Now on to the next fight, we have Javid Basharat, who's 14-0 at 28 years old. He has 3 wins in the UFC versus his opponent Victor Henry, who's 23-6, 2 wins and 1 loss in the UFC at 38 years old. Javid is a highly skilled fighter coming off a win against Mendoza, who was pressuring him throughout the fight. But what I like about Javid is that he doesn't mind getting pressured because he's always going with counters. We've even seen him, surprisingly counter with elbows before. And even when he does get grappled around, he does keep a level head and sticks to his game plan. We do see him really like to use his jab and tape kick to manage distance. And then we have Victor Henry, who's very explosive. He did get countered a few times by his fight with Gravely. The fight was dirty, and I feel that with the pressure that Javid allows his opponents to have, it gives an opening for Victor Henry to make the fight a bit more dirty. So I think that with Victor, what he's going to try and do is inside box, clinch, throw, do dirty boxing techniques. But I think that due to age and who I feel has the better game plan, I think that ultimately we see Javid winning by a decision. On to the next fight, guys. We have TrevorPeek, who's 8-1, and then Mohammad Yahya, who's 12-3, coming out of the UAE Warriors. Let's talk about, though, TrevorPeek. TrevorPeek does not know what defense is. His first loss was against Chep Mariskal, who is now 15-6. My main concern is that his attitude to fighting is just to put on a show. But what I like about him is that he pressures. But then we have Mohammad Yahya, who's on a 5-fight win streak coming out of the UAE Warriors. In 2020, he lost against a fighter that was 3-0. He's then also lost to a fighter that's 9-1. And then he's also lost to a fighter by TKO, and the fighter's record was 1-0. We've seen in his most recent fight that he doesn't deal well whatsoever with pressure, and TrevorPeek having a very heavy pressuring style. I think we see Trevor winning by knockout. And now, guys, for one of the largest disparity in odds, we have Tim Elliott, who's 19-12, versus Mohammad Mokaev, who's 10-0 with 1 no contest. Tim Elliott is a massive underdog, and it's not crazy to see why. He's been submitted by Brendan Royval, who's not the most technical. He's a very opportunistic style grappler, and he got submitted. And then we have Mokaev, who has clean technical grappling, and he's very flexible. So if Tim can somehow snatch a submission, I don't think he'd be able to finish it. Mohammad Mokaev is always involving in his striking, and I think the threat of the takedown is what's going to let him open up his hands, and we see Mokaev get the job done. So my official prediction for this fight is Mohammad Mokaev to win.
3.
Do you should go? And now, like that. All right, ready? 3, 2. And now, guys, let's get 3, 2. And now for the highly anticipated main event. Let's break down. And now for the highly anticipated breakdown of the main event. Okay. And now, guys, for the highly anticipated breakdown of the main event. Let's get into it.
Okay.
Muin Gafurov versus Said Nurmagomedov. Gafurov is 18-5 and Said is 17-3. Gafurov losing his UFC debut against John Castaneda, who is now 19-6. He's also lost a split decision on the Dana White Contender Series, and he's also lost against John Lineker. He has a few exciting wins, like his win over Thiago Silva with a spinning back kick, but it's very bad that he's losing to low-level competition. It's great that we can put on exciting fights, but if you can't put on those fights and those wins in the UFC, you're not really doing well. And then Said Nurmagomedov, who's coming off a loss to Jonathan Martinez, who we saw recently pick up a TKO win against Adrian Yanez. It was a very competitive fight with Said and Jonathan Martinez, but ultimately, Said took a loss on his record. I feel like when we're comparing both fighters, Gafurov and Nurmagomedov, Saeed is the one that's better able to stick to a game plan. When things get tough or when things get close, as seen in the Martinez fight, he's still able to make the fight competitive. Saeed has the better striking and the better submissions. And because of that, I have Saeed Nurmagomedov winning by submission. And then the next fight, guys, Ikram Aliskerov versus the late replacement of Warlley Alves. Ikram in his last 3 fights has won via TKO against Phil Hawes in his most recent fight. Before that, he won by submission on the Dana White Contender Series. And then before that fight, he won by unanimous decision against a fighter that was 19 and 11, which is a bit concerning. But in his most recent fight against Phil Hawes is the reason why this pick gives me so much confidence. We move on to Alves, though, who's stepping in as a replacement for Nasruddin Imavov, who's had visa issues and couldn't get into the UAE. Alves stepping in as a replacement. Normally, he's a welterweight. He's now moving up to middleweight. The only advantage that I'd give him is his speed, being at a lighter weight class. But what I don't like about him is that his only chance is if he blitzes in and catches Ikram. My other main concern is his activity. He's lost against Nicholas Dalby, who was 20-4. And the fight before that was in 2021, and he lost by a round 2 TKO. For me, my prediction is that we have Ikram Aliskerov win by round 2 submission. And now, guys, for one of the most highly anticipated fights on this card, we have Johnny Walker versus Magomed Ankalaev. First, let's talk about Johnny Walker. Johnny Walker's coming off a win against Anthony Smith, which was via decision. Before that, he won against Paul Craig by round 1 knockout via hammer fists. And then before that, he won against Ion Cutelaba by submission. We thought he was going to go on a downward spiral. He's lost against Corey Anderson, Nikita Krylov. He had a win against Ryan Spann, but then lost to Thiago Santos and Jamal Hill. We did think he was going to go on a downward spiral. He then picks up these 3 wins. And after moving to SPG, I think that he's had a more tactical style. He's really relied on his jab and his tape kicks to really manage that distance. And he's actually increasing in his fight IQ. Normally, we see Johnny Walker be erratic. He's doing crazy things like, jump knees and spin kicks and all that kind of stuff. But I think now he's more matured within his fight style. He's really, really honing in onto his skill set and making sure that he's not just a show fighter, but he's producing the results, which you've seen in his last 3 fights. What I think that he does in this fight is that he's not going to be the aggressor, funnily enough. He's not going to be the aggressor. He's going to work with his jabs and his leg kicks. Let's talk about Magomed Ankalaev. Magomed Ankalaev is coming off a draw against Jan Blachowicz, and in that fight, we did see a few holes in his game. What I'm talking about is that Magomed Ankalaev, he is a counter striker. When you force him to move forward, he leaves himself exposed quite a bit, as seen in that Jan Blachowicz fight. Jan made easy work of those calf kicks, damaging them to oblivion, forcing Magomed Ankalaev to have a resting style, which won him round 4 and round 5, making it a draw. I believe now in this fight, Johnny Walker is going to see that sort of blueprint that Jan Blachowicz laid out. Johnny Walker will have more of a tactical style. Johnny Walker will have more of a patient style. Wait for Ankalaev to come to him, where then he can become the counter puncher. He can become the counter fighter. And I actually think we see this as the upset, and Johnny Walker wins by decision. And now, guys, for the crazy, even more highly anticipated co-main event, we have Kamaru Usman stepping on short notice against Chimaev. Massive respect to him. Usman is 20-3 versus Chimaev is 12-0. Heaps of controversy recently of the open workouts with Justin Gaethje and Kamaru Usman, especially with his knees. They then, after the open workouts, took to Twitter to say that everything's fine. Everyone's just trying to clickbait for videos, this and that. Usman's been having issues with his knees from the get-go. He himself has even admitted that he can't run and he has to walk upstairs backwards. I don't think he's ever fought someone like Chimaev before in terms of the chain wrestling and heavy pressure style. Usman has wins over Colby, Burns and Masvidal, but as I said earlier, I don't think that their style of fighting ever translates to something like Chimaev. Even though Chimaev hasn't fought a top 5 caliber fighter, I believe his chain wrestling will put a lot of pressure on Usman's knees. And after the Leon head kick, Usman hasn't been the same. We do talk about Usman's power, but does he really have that sort of power? I mean, he's finished Burns by TKO. He's finished Masvidal by TKO. I mean, the first Colby fight, I mean, there was a bit of controversy around that. Burns has a weak chin. Masvidal has aged. Leon Edwards, he's had him up against the cage for 4 rounds, punching left, right, and center, and he wasn't even able to finish him. I think what's going to happen is that Chimaev is shooting out the gates. He's having a wild style, sort of similar to how we've seen in the Burns fight, but I think Burns has more experience with those pressure style of fighters. Usman doesn't. The official MMA exchange prediction is that Chimaev gets this done by round 1. All right, now, the reason why this card is happening and the reason why we're all tuning in. Alexander steps in on 12 days notice after Charles Oliveira pulls out after suffering a cut from sparring. I believe the reason why Alexander Volkanovski took this fight on short notice is because of his and Islam's first fight together. Alex respected the wrestling from Islam too much, and Islam respected the striking too much from Volkanovski. Let's talk about Islam, who's coming off a very, very close fight win against Volkanovski. In that fight, we see him mixing it up. He caught Volk a lot with those body shots, and with those body kicks, it either forces Volkanovski to move all the way in or to move all the way out. And then Islam would be able to build up from that body kick and develop onto his striking or onto his wrestling. What won Islam that fight was grappling. I didn't like, though, that in the round where Islam took Volkanovski's back, he didn't do anything. No submissions, no nothing. He just laid and prayed. Does that really call, though, for effective grappling if you've just taken the back of your opponent and just sit there? And then we have Volk, who respected the wrestling too much from Islam. Islam's wrestling or submissions was never going to finish Volkanovski anyway. Volk mentioning in an interview with Aaron Bronstetter that he feels mentally refreshed, not having to go through a whole fight camp, and his cardio is up to par when he's in fight camp. But being in camp and just being fit are completely different. Let's talk about Islam. Islam has the home crowd advantage. He has 10 more hours to rehydrate. And he's also been preparing for one of the best lightweights in the world in Charles Oliveira. Volkanovski has only healed up from his elbow surgery 3 to 4 weeks ago. He also was preparing for a fight in January against Ilia Topuria, which has a very different style to Islam. What I like there from Volk is he's mentioned that he's mentally refreshed. He isn't scared about the wrestling, which he respected too much in their first fight. Volkanovski is going to let his hands go. Because there's a more limited threat of the takedown, he's not really thinking about that. He's not thinking about the takedowns because he dealt so well with them in their first fight. And if there's anyone in this world that can get it done, given these circumstances, it's Volkanovski. His fight IQ and ability to change game plans mid-fight is unmatched. Volkanovski himself mentioned that he wants to get this done quickly and to knock him out. And guys, who am I to go against the words of Alexander the Great Volkanovski? So, the official MMA exchange prediction is that Volkanovski gets this done in round 2 or 3 knockout, and he makes history as being the second 145 and 155 double champ. Let's go, Volkanovski. We're all backing you. So guys, that is the MMA exchange full card prediction from the prelims all the way to the main event. Guys, I'll put my picks up on the screen. I'll also put my picks for the main event on the screen via Verdict MMA.